Hello, welcome everyone to the latest episode of All Things M365 Compliance. My name is Nikki Chappell. I'm a Microsoft MVP and the Principal Cloud Architect at Cloudway. And as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Ryan. Welcome.
Yeah, welcome back, everybody. Thanks, Nikki. As you know, my name's Ryan John Murphy, former Microsoft MVP, now working for Microsoft as a compliance TS, and I am a data security champion for Microsoft. And today, we're going to be talking about data classification, and as you can see, we're joined by another guest, Victor. Hello, Victor.
Hello, everybody. Hi, Nikki. Hi, Ryan. Thanks for inviting me over. Let me introduce myself. So my name is Victor Wingsing, and I'm a data security architect, a senior manager over at Protiviti, where I help our clients ensure that their information is well protected against a lot of threats.
Perfect. So I guess, Nikki, we always seem to end up talking about sensitivity labels, data classification, right? No matter what podcast we're doing, and what guests we've got on, there's always a link back to sensitivity labels. And I think, having read some of your blog just now, Victor, and other people's pain points, data classification can end up either a huge mammoth task that people are just scared of taking on. You can end up with analysis paralysis because you really don't know where to start and what with. But I think you've got some good pointers in your blog, and perhaps you can share those with us now and give us a breakdown of what made you to write the blog. And first and foremost, I guess. And then secondly, the tips and tricks and the elements that you put together to make it, let's say, a little bit easier for people to approach and adopt.
Sure thing. So yes, so I did write a blog, and I do have my own blog where I talk about data security and a lot of different things. But talk about today, it's just all on information protection, information classification, to be very, very specific. So the reason why I wrote that was because I've been working in several engagements, several projects where I've been talking to CIOs and CISOs. And one of the things that I often notice is that they want immediate protection. DLP, IRM, immediately implemented. But then when you ask them a question, so what are you actually protecting? Data. Okay, good. They have a classification of your data. Do you know what you're protecting? That's when they start taking that pause and say, actually, I don't know. I don't have proper taxonomy of what we consider as sensitive. I don't have an idea of how many sensitive data are actually out there. And I don't even know if my own employees understand what needs to be considered as sensitive. So immediately we take a pause, and then we start looking into, okay, we need to start understanding information classification first before we go into that protection side of things. So let me share what I've put into my blog so that everybody can have an idea of what I'm talking about here. All right. So I called my blog post here in the center of it all, because this solution is key to ensuring that everything that gets implemented, especially in Purview, works really, really well. And what that solution is, it's all about Microsoft Purview. Let me make this image a lot bigger. There we go. Hopefully this gets presented in your screen very well. But as you can see here, we have MIP in the center of everything. It is critical to what you can see on the left side of the screen, Office 365, Endpoint DLP, Defender for Cloud Apps, all the way down to even Azure Purview Data Map, or it's going to be rebranded again very soon from what I saw. But all of that gets tied up into, or reports back, or uses what MIP is able to provide, which is all about the data classification service. So if you don't mind, I'll talk more about what MIP is and what sensitivity label is for those people who might not know what it is. So MIP, or Purview Information Protection, provides organizations with the ability to, I would say, very broadly, two things. Number one, the ability to be able to identify data. So that gives you the ability to be able to scan your organization and understand what are sensitive, because it has built-in sensitive information types. So think about passport information, credit card, bank information. Those are different patterns that could be sitting in any document that you have in your organization. And with MIP, you can scan that and you'll be able to understand how many of those type of information are out there. And the second thing that gives you is the ability to classify that data. The classification is in the form of sensitivity labels. So now you are able to, if you look at the bottom of the screen here, apply any of these labels or even define your own label. So in my example here, an organization can say, oh, I want to classify this document as confidential and then apply appropriate protection there. Or I can say that this document is public so that anybody can access this document. And I will have less restriction if the label is labeled public. So these are kind of things that needs to be put in place because, again, if you look at the entire map, all of these different applications, even third-party ones, would use these information classification and labels to make sure that protection works. So I'll talk more about how that works for the different applications. Nikki, Ryan, any questions that you'd like to ask?
Agree with you. I think it's really important that first step because not all data is equal. And I think, line of business systems are easy. This is an HR system. This is a finance system. With Microsoft 365, we've got everything and the kitchen sink stored in there. We've got thousands of SharePoint sites, millions of pieces of files, and it's all unstructured data. So it's really important to protect it. So you've probably got 75% of your data in there is kind of redundant, transient, obsolete type of data. It was point of time information, but you are going to have your crown jewels in there, really sensitive data that you want to protect. And I think for me, it's trying to focus in on that priority data first, because I think as Ryan mentioned earlier, you can kind of get drowned in that paralysis analysis type of thing. Yeah, it's a hard job, but it's a critical job.
And I think the infograph that you've got here is a great artifact, and people can pick this up on your website, which you can see in the top left-hand corner. And I'll put it in the bio of the podcast anyhow. But I think things like this, artifacts like this, Victor, really help people understand, okay, I know where I need to be is the obvious statement, right? But nobody really knows where to start. Okay, it's the beginning piece. And I think having like the sensitive information types, a lot of people seem to think that these are not essential to labeling to a point, not essential to DLP to a point, but I'm sure people have been rolling their eyes now. I've said many times that these, for me, are your source anchors into labeling, into DLP, into IRM and everything else. And I think the fact that you've got them there, the out-of-the-box custom advanced classification, and you've got it above the labeling, going into the labeling, is a key indication that they are a critical point. They are a critical piece of what you want to build out. And data classification service in whole, as I said, if you can understand that data catalog and what you actually want to trigger that source anchor on, whether it be credit card, social security number, into labeling, into retention labeling, into DLP, and so on and so forth, you've kind of got the main concrete structure, but I love how everything else around this kind of plugs into that. And I think you've done a great job there. That's very easy for somebody to understand and consume.
Exactly. And that's one of the reasons why I put this particular blog post. This actually ties back to another one that I wrote, which is more for a helpful guide to a new CISO or maybe a new security engineer. So joining a new organization, what are the things that you need to be thinking about and looking into? Yes, you need to look into how you patch your service and so on. Looking internally, looking at the actual data that you need to protect, you need to be thinking about this. Again, you're right, the taxonomy, the sensitive information types, and the data governance. Let me talk about the data governance of this and how this actually ties back into how this plays a large part in the data governance strategy. So, as I was saying earlier, MIP plays a really big part in your information identification and then a classification. And then there's this other piece called the protection that helps you manage access controls. More about that later. But going into the data governance side, how do you use this? Well, as you look into your unstructured data landscape, one of the things that you need to understand is how within the data lifecycle process, you create, store, delete, share, and eventually maybe even retain data. This classification would help because with MIP, you can also use this as part of your even records management solution so that you can say if a record or data is classified as, let's say, confidential, and it's been this old now or this age, then I would apply this particular retention policy to it so that it will be archived, recorded, or do something with it after a certain period of time. Right? So that's, again, one of the reasons why it's very, very important. And again, back on the data governance, how do you even manage who gets access to this data? So that's where the protection comes into play. With the sensitivity labels, you're also able to manage who gets access to the data by applying access controls / encryption to, for example, confidential, or even a higher label like top secret or highly confidential, so that only specific individuals or specific partners or vendors that you have will be able to access this document. So it's really something that every organization must get right, and everything else will fall into place because you'll be able to get a good visibility of how your data is being used, created, shared, and even moved around your entire organization.
And how have you found the adoption of that, Victor? And it's easy to come up with the blueprint of this or the conceptual design of it, but most customers will ask, okay, now I've got that blueprint. What about the adoption? Many customers will say, can I segment this to a business department first and foremost, or do I have to do a big bang on this? What's been your approach? What's been your advice?
That's a very good question. So that's the conversation I've had with, again, a lot of the CISOs or Chief Information Security Officers that I've had this past couple of months. So yes, you can segment it, and yes, you can also do a big bang. But the best practice that we often give to our clients and to our partners is, let's do a structured, smaller deployment. So we'll do it in batches. And you could do that through MIP because you can create a policy and only scope in a set number of users or maybe a specific group. So I'll give you an example of what we have done very, very recently. We targeted HR. Why HR? HR is the group that looks after our payslips, our personal information. We know for a fact that they already have a lot of sensitive information that we don't want any hackers, or we don't want it to be leaked out without proper protection. So we've deployed it to HR first.
That's good to know. And I think one of the main questions I'm usually asked is, if I've got this published to a particular department and then they start sharing that data outside and it's encrypted, that those particular users are not going to be able to view it, right? But that's where you come in with your strategy of, okay, HR, we know HR shares data with legal, for example, or even finance, for example. And then you can start to build in a process of, we know where this is going to be hit. We know where the trace of the tracking of the document is going to be. Then you, like you're saying, Victor, you've got HR first, then potentially legal, then potentially financial, and then you've kind of got that grouping together. That more often than not covers off most scenarios when data is being labeled.
Oh yes, for sure. And then one of the things I really like about this is that speaking about the encryption and the sharing piece, with your access control or encryption, you are actually able to choose how you want specific groups to be able to access your data. You could even say if it's internal recipients or internal users who you're sharing this data to, they will have same rights as you. So they'll be able to open the data, they're able to freely share it. But if this data is now shared outside of your organization, then a different type of permission gets applied using the same label. So for your users, it's seamless, it's easy. They don't need to think about how data is being protected. They just know that the moment that it goes out of the organization, it is protected from being reshared or maybe even forwarded.
So talking about that, the the business just kind of share it. How important do you think that whole user adoption and training and being able to decide what label to apply and also what information is confidential?
Yeah, and that's where the end user education comes into play. So one of the things that I've been doing quite often in any engagement is not the technology, because we know managing the technology is easy. You click tick boxes, especially if it's Microsoft 365, you tick specific tick boxes and it's going to work. But it's the end user engagement that's a bit of the challenge. So we spend most of the time making sure that we are able to engage with senior stakeholders. We build a champion user groups so that they know what is upcoming and what these new capabilities are. And even before that, so if you were to go back to the very, very first or the beginning of the engagement, we work with again senior stakeholders, senior IT team members, and we start planning how each capability will be rolled out. And in every piece of that, there will be a business engagements. Because, for example, if we're going to be running a data, what do you call data classification, or even a data scan, right? We will let them know this is what's going to happen. We'll be able to find out how many sensitive information that you have in your shared points and your OneDrives, and we'll report back to you what we find, tell you what we will do afterwards. So definitely the end user engagement is a key thing to making sure that any rollout of Purview, especially information protection, becomes successful. You must get the end user engagement right.
Yeah. I think, again, another thing I'm famous for saying is if the user doesn't understand the data that they're working with, they're not going to be able to label it accurately enough. And I think there's a good process with automatic sensitivity labels to assist with that when you're recommending labels. So it's detecting the sensitive information type in the background and saying, hey, Ryan, hey, Nikki, hey, Victor, I've just detected a credit card number in here. We think this should be marked as financial. I think that also helps from a user adoption perspective, because you're giving that inclination of, you kind of know the data, but it picked up on a sensitive information type inside of the document or the email. Now I'm going to present you with an option rather than you having to think about that option. So I definitely think those E5 capabilities, if you want to get this right and you want to streamline this, is something to take into consideration with automatic labeling. It doesn't have to be full on slamming a label on it. I think recommendation is definitely a way to go first and foremost. What has your input been, Nikki, Victor, on that?
Oh, for sure. So this is also the reason why I have some of these color coded with blue and orange. So Ryan just pointed out there are some capabilities that only works within E5, and automatic sensitivity labels is one of them. This is a feature that gives the organization the ability to show prompts on top of your Word, Excel, PowerPoint, or even Outlook to let the users know that, hey, we have detected something inside of your data that looks like it's sensitive. So again, it depends on your policy, but that is very helpful, because that, again, helps remove the thinking from the end user and transform from inaction to an action. So we've detected something, click on accept, and then a label will be applied. And if that label has encryption, then even better, right? There's, again, a lot of orange items here. Happy to talk about it. One of the items that I need to mention is that one key thing that I've been doing with a lot of organizations right now that is only available in E5 is on the trainable classifiers and exact data matches. And those are capabilities within Purview that allows you to be able to say, I'm going to use machine learning. So instead of using patterns like bank information and a passport number, which always have the same set of patterns, if you have data that, for example, contracts that would change from time to time, but you want to make sure that those data gets classified as sensitive, you could use machine learning and get Microsoft 365 or Purview in this case to be able to classify that data. It's one of the things that we encourage our CISOs to look into.
Yeah, for sure. We just done a exact data match, haven't we, Nikki, with Evelino, which was released this week. And I said in the podcast, and I'll say it again, I think trainable classifiers and EDMs are overlooked at times. I think people just gravitate towards sensitive information types, but it's great to see you've got them there. You're starting to experiment with them, and I think with the advancements over the last couple of years with TCs and EDMs has really put them front and center.
Okay. Well, I was just going to say about organisations then that don't have the E5 licenses. So you're on Business, Premium, or E3. You don't get those options to automatically classify your data. So you will be reliant when you're on the end users picking an appropriate label, or you have the option to apply a default label effectively to all the content. So that's kind of really the distinguish, isn't it, between having Business, Premium and E3. You are reliant, and it's really heavy on the end user manually labeling. But with the E5, that's where you've got kind of all of the advanced sophisticated tools to kind of automatically classify. And particularly for large organizations where you've got a huge volume of data, it is kind of really difficult to try and put that onus on the end user to choose the correct label.
No, 100%. Just adding on to that, so another big benefit of them using MIP plus E5 is that with E5 we get DLP for Teams. So we know that Teams is a heavily used application across the organization. People chat, share information there, and we have seen instances where different divisions would share sensitive information. I can send, for example, credit card numbers or my bank statements to my HR representative, and those are all captured in Teams. What if I want to make sure that that is protected as well? So with E5, you get DLP for Teams enabled, and then you can apply a policy so that you can say, if this sensitive information type appears in Teams, you could apply this policy to either block, restrict, or just notify the user that they're sharing sensitive information. So again, it helps them understand what is happening, what kind of practice are they doing.
Do you know, I think I've said this a lot recently, and I think it rings true for a lot of organizations that I've specifically spoken to, even people just on LinkedIn and other security forums, that Teams often gets forgotten with DLP, or people say, no, we'll come to that in phase 2. I'm mesmerized by it because Teams is becoming the absolute quickest way to exfiltrate data out of an environment, because you can actually link in, if you've got a federation open, to anyone, anywhere, at any point. And people just gravitate towards Exchange, SharePoint, and OneDrive. And it's like, well, what about Teams? Oh, we're not bothered about Teams right now. It's like, you do know Teams is becoming the fastest exfiltration path beyond Exchange, because they know Exchange is covered. They know there's DLP policy in Exchange because it always has been. You've given them this application now, and they're firing off data to their Hotmail address or partners or friends or wives, whatever the case may be. And it's like, I always find it mesmerizing that people don't consider Teams when they're considering Exchange, SharePoint, and OneDrive as an exfiltration path. Like, I'll come to it in phase 2. I'm like, what?
And one thing that we have noticed in the field is that as more and more, I would say, younger people, I'm going to include that there. I'm going to include it in that group. Younger people would gravitate towards using Teams instead of Outlook. So most of the time we'll put the policy to protect data from being exfiltrated in Outlook, but actually it's slowly moving, or if it hasn't moved in there yet, it's already in Teams. Again, the younger generation loves using Teams because it's easy for them to reach out to people and share information. So definitely Teams needs to be one of the items that they need to start looking at very, very early on.
I definitely agree. And it's something that I always put into place. And, again, not to repeat myself, but I just find it's bizarre that people just don't think Teams is an exfiltration path. It's like, it's more open than Exchange. That's the one thing I would look at first. Then I'd look at Exchange, SharePoint, and OneDrive. It's crazy. But you do need E5 for it. And there's a lot of advancements coming out for endpoint DLP in the next couple of years, and I think people will gravitate towards it slowly. But you can see that you've got cloud upload, app control, USB, network print, clipboard, desktop. And I think to myself at that point, you would want to cover off that also from a perspective, uploading to cloud and so on and so forth. And it's just, I just find, again, bizarre people don't look at the full M365 stack and the device stack when they're dealing with DLP. Exchange just seems to be the obvious answer, right?
Yeah. Oh, just going back to the capability of, since you already mentioned different for cloud apps and even endpoint. So in one of my previous engagements where we deployed MIP, they were using Slack quite heavily. So within Slack, you can actually use MIP with Defender for Cloud Apps and say, if this data in this approved application, so Slack is an approved application for them, and this approved application is going there and it's marked as confidential, I would block it from going to Slack. Or in some cases, if it goes to, of course, the C-suite level, that's only them that's permitted. But that is something that is only going to be available to any organization if you have, again, that proper data taxonomy, the proper classification, and data identification.
And you've also got the capabilities now with the data security posture management for AI, where you can actually assess what's going to third-party generation AI apps. And again, it's using the same information, those sensitive information type and your sensitivity labels. And you can see, well, not only what are people doing in-house with Microsoft 365 Copilot, they can look at that shadow Gen AI and say, potentially what are the risks of sharing outside. So pulling all of these different tools together, it is really, you want to know the risk level of your data. Is it okay to share it with this third party app, download it, share it via Teams, or is this high risk data? So everything ultimately does come back down to that classification and labeling.
100%. I did not include DPS, data security posture management for AI here yet. That's going to be coming soon, so I'm going to update this. But you're correct. So with data posture security management, or even for the Gen AI, sensitivity labels, data classification is still very, very important, because then that's something that you can use to say, like what Nikki just mentioned, what will I allow for Gen AI to be able to use, right? I can trust it, or I can say, if it's just this Copilot or maybe OpenAI solution or ChatGPT, I'm going to allow it. Anything else, I can go ahead and block. That's something that can be done as well. So Defender for Cloud Apps is what you can use for that. And that will only work if you have the proper data classification. How about this? May I talk about the Azure Purview Data Map? Because I know we have been talking about the unstructured data side of things, but how about the structured data side of things? Right. So you can see on the right side of the screen here, Azure Purview Data Map. Again, from what I know, it's going to change. The name is going to change again. But with MIP, you are not limited to using it to unstructured data, but you can also use it to structured data. So how I would explain it to my CISOs is that unstructured data will be Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook that's sitting in your SharePoint, OneDrive, email, and your desktop, or even your on-prem servers. But structured data would be anything to do with data that's in SQL Server, right? In Azure Blobs, Azure Files. These are items that are in columns, headers, usually cleaned up, and so on. So with MIP, you can also extend it to even Fabric now, right? So to Azure, so that you can start classifying and identifying what's inside of those data. So now you have a unified labeling across your unstructured and structured data. So anytime that you see a database that is labeled as confidential, you know that there is sensitive information out there. Anything that contains a database contains or labeled as general, you know that's just for general purpose. It's not that important to put very heavy protection. So MIP is able to extend to those different services. And one of the things that I've seen a lot of organizations do is they also extend it to AWS. So it's available for S3 as of the time that I put this together. You can put it into AWS S3.
Yeah, I really like that. And I think the AWS thing comes up a lot. They look at Azure Purview Data Map and think, oh, it's just Microsoft stuff. It's just Microsoft data. But I think the Azure integration does give a lot of people a lot of confidence that, okay, I can bring third-party data to this and I can start to map and, protect is probably a larger word to use, but, give it some protection at some point from an AWS perspective. I also like the fact you've got the blob storage in there as well. A lot of people do use blob storage for throwing third-party data into or bringing archive data into Azure. Even some customers, they have applications that throw data into blob storage from, across their network and so on and so forth. We've seen it with eDiscovery at points as well, where, people are using the blob storage. And now it gives you the ability to actually apply a classification to that, because if that's a dump of data from eDiscovery and it's a litigation case, you can label that blob storage relevant so people can understand what's in it and what type of sensitive data is in there as well. So we've got you covered from all angles.
100%. Now, there's another one, if I can. I'd love to talk about the insider risk management and how that uses MIP. Because at the start of our session today, I mentioned a lot of the CISOs, CIOs would immediately jump into DLP and IRM without understanding their classification strategy. For MPIRM, Microsoft Purview Insider Risk Management, this is a solution that helps organizations be able to understand what their internal users are doing and if there's any internal threats. One of those internal threats that we would often see is a user would send out sensitive data outside of an organization. That action by itself is not something to be concerned about, but it will be concerning if you suddenly see same user sending sensitive data multiple times a day to an external party, or maybe even to their personal email account. So what we have been doing with our clients is we try to help them understand that, again, with the proper data classification, with the proper protection policies, or rather classification and data identification, we'll be able to use IRM much, much better, because that would tell us, hey, which specific SharePoint sites do we need to point IRM to, right? So that we know that if someone starts downloading files from this SharePoint site, that's the only time that it would trigger and it would apply a policy. We don't want IRM to continuously be running and blocking people from doing their work, right? So that will only work if you have that information classification and identification done properly.
I was just going to say, kind of, there's a lot of things here, isn't there, that is reliant on MIP. So once you've classified all the data, what would be your first go-to tool to implement once you've got that labeling in place?
Oh, that's a very good question. So let's say MIP deployments 100% complete. All the users are now using sensitivity labels and automatic classification. Everything's complete. What will be the next logical step to implement? For me, that will be DLP and MDCA. So you have MDCA, you see on the screen on top, and then endpoint DLP is one of the items here. But you can apply DLP for Office 365, because then that gives me the ability to say data, or put in a policy to say if data is marked as confidential and it goes to, let's say, mail.ru or someone in Russia, I can go ahead and then block that. All right. I then use similar policy to say in endpoint, if this file is labeled as confidential and you're uploading it to a cloud service that I have specifically said no, right? It's a shadow cloud service that you don't sanction, then I can block that, or I can send a report to IT team. And then, so that's one for Office 365. I go to endpoint, will be my number 2. And then my next one will be on Defender for Cloud Apps. How will I permit or allow my approved application to be able to use my sensitive data?
Yeah, great. I think you've got some good examples there as well, like Dropbox, Box, G Suite. They are the main items that I see a lot of people sharing with. But I think a lot of customers do say, okay, Ryan, if I block this, what about, the third parties that we actually work with that rely on Dropbox, for sharing items? Why you would, I don't know, but we do have customers that do that. And it's like, well, you can put exceptions in there. You can make specific policies with specific groupings of people and so on and so forth. It's not on all that catastrophe of a block. You can actually build in different rules within the DLP policy to say, these definitely not, but these people, yeah, but still with a limitation on how much they can share into that Dropbox. So that third party sharing, that cross company sharing or cross sister company sharing, you see it a lot with mergers and acquisitions as well, where you're putting data into a FTP site and so on and so forth. So, like I say, one of the biggest questions I've asked is, okay, that's great, you can do that, but what about different conditions for different people? And it's absolutely there for you to take advantage of. Have you come across that before yourself, Victor?
Yes, ServiceNow, Salesforce, when Workday, the three biggest application that would often be integrated with an organization's environment. The questions that again the CIOs will ask is, will there be any disruption in any of our processes? Right? If Salesforce or ServiceNow uses these data, will it cause issues? The answer is no. We can design a policy to keep everything still secure, even encrypted. We can upload it to these services because we can put a policy to allow them to be able to use the services.
Yeah, I like that. And I think that's a good thing from Microsoft as well, because I do know some other applications are quite drastic when you put in policies in place. I don't think they have the flexibility as what Microsoft does from a rules-based perspective, and the conditions and the actions and the notifications and so on and so forth. So I know there's other companies out there that offer DLP solutions, but like I say, sometimes that policy and rule set is very restrictive, and you have to be careful what you're doing. And then people gravitate towards blocking at the proxy level, and then everything's blocked at that point, right? But I definitely think our service plugged into MDCA is going to give you that perimeter network policy and rule set that is bespoke to you as an organization. And I really like the input of that from Microsoft.
Now that you mentioned third parties, so one of the things, again, I really like about MIP is that it's sort of the industry standard for this. So the reason why I'm saying that is because I know for a fact that companies like Trellix, Varonis, and even Zscaler, that sort of acts like MDCA, they all use MIP as one of the items that they look for in the metadata of the information to be able to apply specific policies, right? So it makes it easier for, again, an organization to be able to adopt this. If you don't want to use Purview DLP, well, first of all, I don't know why you would do that, but if you don't want to, you're not restricted to using Purview DLP. If you want to use MIP, you can use MIP with those other third-party providers. And that list of third-party DLP or even IRM solutions are ever growing because they recognize MIP sort of the industry standard for this.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's rapidly becoming that, and I think the fact that Microsoft give out the SDK for other companies to build applications with it, we've seen it with Adobe as well, building the SDK into that. I think that gives a wider spectrum of use from MIP, and I think it was a great choice from Microsoft.
I think the whole session today is really useful because it's like putting everything into context, really, to say, this is an integrated suite of tools. And as you've mentioned, it does extend out and it is used by third parties. So doing that data classification, that first step, knowing your data, is kind of the first step on your journey to improve your kind of data security posture.
I think what a great way to end, right? We've got this great artifact here, Victor. So thanks for your time of actually doing this and coming on the podcast to go through it. Everything that's in front of you here today, for anybody watching or listening, we will put in the bio in the YouTube and Spotify, so you can go and grab and take a look at Victor's website. There's other great stuff on there as well. As I said, I quick look at it beforehand. But Victor, any closing comments from yourself before we wrap up?
Well, before I thank both of you, I'd just like to make a personal statement here that I was able to actually pass my SC400 and SC100 by watching a lot of the episodes from this very podcast. Through your guests, I've learned so much more. Now, I would like to thank you for continuing to do this. Thank you for bringing security experts, people like myself, to be able to talk about this topic, because I am hoping that this episode can also help future me to be able to learn more about how to protect data and make their organization secure. So, Nikki, Ryan, thank you very much for inviting me over in today's session. I really, really appreciate it.
No worries. And let's get you back on once we get expanding solutions on top of here as well. I'm sure there's going to be lots coming out in the next couple of years. So hopefully we'll see you again, Victor. Perfect. All right. On that note, I guess that's us for another episode, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, Victor. Thanks, Nikki. See you later.